Striking off a company can be an alternative to placing the company into formal insolvency when there is simply no assets in the company to fund a liquidation, or the directors are unwilling or unable to personally meet the costs of a liquidation. A strike-off application is not always applicable, and therefore it is always best to seek professional advice from a licensed insolvency practitioner to discuss all of the options available to the company to see if the strike-off application is the best course available to the directors. A strike-off application is not a formal insolvency process under the Insolvency Act, and is in fact a Companies Act process, and therefore it will never be as quick and as efficient as a formal liquidation. There are certain restrictions regarding when a company can be struck off, which are basically it hasn't traded or changed its name within the last 3 months. Provided that the company meets all of the qualifying criteria, the first step to apply for a strike-off application is to complete a DS01 form, which can be downloaded from the Companies House website. Once that form is completed, it will need to be submitted to Companies House. On receipt of that form, Companies House will place a notice in the London Gazette advertising the strike-off application. Within 7 days of submitting that form, a copy must be sent to all of the shareholders, directors, employees and creditors and any other interested parties. While it is not required by law, I always think it's a good idea to provide all interested parties with a summary of the company's assets and liabilities, together with a history of the company detailing the events that led to its insolvency. This is important because any interested party can, within 3 months of the London Gazette notice, object to the striking off. Accordingly, therefore, by demonstrating that there are no assets and explaining the reasons why the company should be struck from the register, any interested party are more likely not to object. If a creditor does object, then the whole process is suspended for a 6-month period. After 6 months, Companies House will advertise the strike-off application again in the London Gazette, and the process starts again. If a creditor does object, I would normally write to that creditor to ask them to either withdraw their objection and allow the company to be struck off, or alternatively invite them to issue a winding-up petition against the company. Issuing a winding-up petition will cost the creditor anywhere between £2,000 to £3,500, and usually the creditor will be unwilling to incur this cost because often it can be seen as throwing good money after bad. If there are no objections, or any objections that have been received are withdrawn, Companies House will then strike the company from the register. Any assets that belong to the company will then become what is known as bona vacantia, which means that they will vest in the Crown. 2 disadvantages of a strike-off application are, throughout the process, the directors of the company are still responsible for the company's dealings, and also any interested party can apply to have a company restored within a 20-year period from the date of the striking off. Accordingly, while a strike-off application takes significantly longer to bring the life of a company to an end when compared to a liquidation, it is a useful tool when there are simply no funds to formally wind up a company.